Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Will, and we're going to be talking about microfilm scanning and the factors that are going to affect your price. And just so you know who I am, I work in sales and marketing at BMI. So I do some sales, I do some marketing, I work with ops and projects, so I kind of dabble in everything. So a bit of knowledge on the scanning side, and we'll go over those factors coming up. Okay, before getting into the actual meat of the webinar, couple nuts and bolts. Right now, if you could do me a favor and please raise your hand if you can hear me. Okie dokie, sound looks like some people can. Perfect. If you could put those down, that'd be great. And then put them back up if you can see my screen. You should be seeing the screen that says nuts and bolts. Please raise your hand. Please raise your hand. All right, perfect. I see a few people doing that. So it's working. Excellent. Thank you. You are muted and not on video, so please use the chat feature for any questions you may have. Ask them along the way. Feel free to do that. I may not see them right away, but I do have time at the end to answer those questions. So if I don't see it right away, I'll get to the end. If I do see it, when you ask it, I'll try to answer the question on the fly. All right, the purpose of today's webinar is so that you understand the 9 cost factors that go into microfilm scanning. And I do have one of my colleagues helping me out to make sure. Oh, chat's disabled, but Q&A is on. Okay, so he's letting me know that the Q&A feature is on. So use the question and answer feature, not the chat feature. Thank you, colleague Jeremy. It's always good to have someone helping you doing these webinars. So the purpose is to understand the 9 cost factors that we, BMI, have identified regarding microfilm scanning. Different companies may say there are different factors, but these are what we believe are the 9 main factors that will affect your microfilm scanning project price. And hope you come away with a baseline of your project cost. No, you'll not have a to the cent price of a project that you're going to work on, but you should have a kind of a ballpark of where your project may land. All right, and before even getting into the factors, I'm sure you're wondering, can you just give me a baseline cost of how much is my project going to cost? I have microfilm. Will, can you tell me how much is it going to cost? It depends. Of course, it depends. It's going to be specific to your project, but in general, very high level, you're going to be looking at about $20 to $40 per roll. Very ballpark. And the 9 factors that we're going to go into will kind of push the range of this either towards the lower end, towards the higher end, below that number, above that number. But if you just have a collection of rolls, you can figure you're probably going to be somewhere in that range. Now, what's microfilm? Boom. Microfilm, the term is sometimes thrown around interchangeably with microfiche. So I just want to make it clear that today we are talking about microfilm, the reels or rolls that look like this. Later on, there'll be a webinar about microfiche, like the sheets, but today specifically, we're talking about microfilm rolls. All right, now onto the factors. So factor number 1 is the number of rolls. So the quantity. This is essential to the scope. Everything else will tie into it, but the quickest way to get an idea of at least ballpark price is how many rolls do you have? And you can go into indexing and all the other parts of this project that we're going to talk about, but we have to have a quantity to give you a price because it's going to be vastly different if you have 1 roll compared to 10,000 rolls. You can imagine why. But on the aggregate, a small project in our mind is something that's fewer than 100 rolls. So you may have 1 roll, you may have 10, you may have 90. That's what we consider a smaller project. A medium project is a couple hundred, a few hundred. So anywhere around 100 plus to a few hundred is what we can kind of consider a standard medium-sized project. And then you have the large project, which once you're in the thousands, that's more of a large project. Now, there are projects that go to the tens or close to 100,000 rolls, but anything above 1,000 is what we consider a larger project. Now, touching on this before we go into the next factor, that $20 to $40 range, that's where this is going to come into play. If you have a small project, well, yeah, I'll start with the small project. If you have a small project, you're going to be pushing towards the higher end of that range, potentially even beyond it. Because if you have 5 rolls, a lot of the pricing, although we're going to go over these 9 factors here, a lot of the pricing and effort of these projects is really a lot in the setup. So getting projects even ready to go. So if you have a small project that's 10, 15 rolls, by the time we even set it up and start scanning, that's pretty much the entire project. So even though I'm saying $20 to $40 is a good range, it may be more than that if you have a small project. Once you get into the medium and large style projects, that's when that range is truly going to come into effect. Type of film is the next factor that will affect your price. So there are two sizes, 16 and 35 millimeter. And 16 millimeter is actually that picture I showed you before, the microfilm roll. That's a 16 millimeter roll. The width of the actual film is about 3/4 of an inch if you pulled it out and measured it. And you're going to have office style docs on there like permits, HR records, student records. Those types of records will typically be on 16 millimeter film. And then you have 35 millimeter film, where if you take out the actual physical film, it measures roughly 1.5 inches wide. And then you're going to have records such as newspapers, engineering drawings, oversized books, things of that sort will be typically on 35 millimeter film. Next, we have the length, which there are two lengths, at least if it's a full roll, 100 foot and 215 foot. And length is an essential piece of this, because even though it's still a single roll, even just seeing those two lengths, if I have a 100-foot roll and a 215-foot roll, you can tell that with one of them, you're scanning about twice as much actual film. So the cost is going to go up from that. Not necessarily linear, like twice the cost, but it is going to be more expensive than scanning a 100-foot film. 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter, both are in a 100-foot length. 16 millimeter is where you get the 215 lengths. There are no 35 millimeter 215 feet film. And then just kind of local terminology, 100-foot film is also called thick film, and then 215 is called thin film because it actually is a different thickness. It's hard to describe it, but if you have a collection of lots of rolls of film and you find a couple of them that seem a bit different, you start squeezing them, 100-foot thick film actually feels, it's harder to squeeze. It's kind of more, imagine squeezing like a normal sheet of printer paper compared to like cardstock. You can tell the difference. It's hard to describe. You can tell. Same thing with 100 versus 215 feet. We have videos and blogs on that as well, but that will be a factor based on type of film. Reduction ratio is the, let me see here. I have a question. It says, will I be sharing the slide deck? Yes. Well, I plan to have this recording. Actually, we used to use GoToWebinar. We recently switched over to Zoom a bit ago. So this is my first Zoom webinar, meetings all the time, but webinar. So I believe I will have a recording of this for you. So I plan to send that out or get that to you after the fact. So if I'm not able to do that, I will reach out to the person that contacted me about this and talk to you separately, but I plan to have a recording of this video. Thank you for the question. Reduction ratio. Higher reduction equals more images. Now, what's reduction ratio? Let's take this 16 millimeter film here. Typically, a 16 millimeter roll of film, 16 millimeter film will have a 24x reduction ratio. That means if I have a roll of film and I have 24x reduction, I take that image and multiply it 24 times. Now I have the original size 8.5 by 11 document. It's 24x reduced to get the reduction ratio. If I, 35 millimeter are typically like newspapers, 9 to 17x-ish. They vary, but the reduction ratio will come into play, especially when you may have a 100-foot film, 16 millimeter, where it's 48x reduction ratio, or you may have 215-foot film, duplex film, that's also 48x. Smaller images, they're fitting more images. So there are more images on the roll. That means more have to be processed. That can affect your price. So 100-foot roll film, if it's 24x, it'll have fewer images than 48x reduction ratio. So there's more images on the 48x, meaning there may be an increased cost. Let's see, image layout, simplex. No, that's duplex, but I'll go back to simplex here. This is simplex, image, 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 image. That's what simplex means, just one image after the other. 35 millimeter, I've never seen duplex. I don't think it exists. 16 millimeter is really where it's going to come to play. You have all these different variations. So image, 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 that's simplex. Duplex is like this. You're going to have, well, that's just a kind of a title image, but then you have images on top of each other. And typically these are like front page, back page, front page, back page, front, back, front, back, front, back. So duplex, 2 images per frame. Duo and serpentine is a type of duplex. It's not as common, but it's kind of weird where this may be the first image and actually it goes instead of image 1 and then back of it, or image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to the end of the roll. This is probably a 215-foot roll, all the way down and then loops back around. So the beginning image is here, the last image is here. It's bizarre, but we do see film like that. We just work with our clients to figure out how to set up the project so that your images are ordered properly once they're scanned. I have a hand raised, and is there a question, or maybe it's just a hand raised by mistake? I don't see a question, so I will continue moving on. 35 millimeter, there could be a difference compared to this. So this is just a normal simplex 35 millimeter. When I say multi-image, occasionally you might get a 35 millimeter style roll, but with office size docs on there, and it might be 1, 2, 3, 4 images that were photographed at the same time. So it's not one big image per frame like a drawing or newspaper. You're gonna have 4 office size documents that were photographed all together. That can be more expensive because the cropping, we not just scanning, but then you have to go in after and separate those images, make sure they're in the proper order and things of that sort. So that can update, change your price. There's a question about duo serpentine film. I don't have an exact how much. It depends on the actual film, if it's the layout, and if we can easily capture those images and make sure that we can put them in order. It can increase the price, but if it's a simple, okay, we know where the first image is, where the last image is, it should just be a code application. It may not affect the price, but it is a different non-standard format that I just do want to point out here. Thank you for the question. I hope that answers it. And then number of images ties to all these things. If it's a 60 millimeter roll film, more images than 35 millimeter. If it's 100 or 215, that'll change the images. Reduction ratio, image layout, all these things tie into the number of images that are on the film. So although the physical scanning is important, there's the post-processing. So the more images you have, there's gonna be more processing of those images after the fact. So the more you have can affect your price. And then something called blips. These little guys here are blips. This is a single level blip. It's the little one. Then there's the kind of wider one. That's a double. I have seen triple level blips. I actually worked on a project. It was the one time I saw them where there's an even larger blip. These are, these help with indexing. So it actually comes into a later part of the discussion, but blips are part of a system where it used to be machines, and you could take your roll, you have an index somewhere saying, I'm looking for the Will Whitney file. Okay, go to roll 510. And Will Whitney's file is going to be on roll 510, frame 1200. You go to the cabinet, you find the roll, oh, there's 510, go put it on a machine, and you type in that frame 1200, and it just goes, it zips the film to that frame, and oh, look at there's Will's, there's my file. It's because there are these blips on here that machine can find the frame based on that blip marking each image. So a single level blip just marks an image. Double level blips come into play where this is likely the beginning of a document, double level. Every single level behind it, those 3 pages are part of this entire document. Oh, there's another double level, new document. Then you move on. So blips can help in the indexing part where you may, if you have blip film, you may not have to have a certain type of indexing because it's already captured by those blips. All right, resolution. So 300 DPI is a standard, dots per inch, or pixels per inch. 99.99% of projects are done at 300 DPI. Some paper projects are done at 200 because you're scanning from the source material, the actual paper. Whereas microfilm, you are let's see, you have the original document, you photograph and create the film. That's a second generation. Then you scan it. It's a 3rd generation copy. So you can imagine a little bit of degradation of the image quality going forward. But like from paper, 200 DPI is okay. Typically with film, 300 DPI is what you're going to want to do. You can go to 400. You can actually go higher than that, 600, 1200, etc. This takes longer to scan. So if you want 400, it's going to cost more because it actually takes longer because you're getting a higher resolution scan. In my 10 years at the company, I've done one project at 400, and I've known about 4 or 5 projects that have from other sales folks that have done above 300 DPI. It's very rare. This one was for a company that worked on a bridge, and they wanted to replicate parts of that bridge to kind of, what's the word, like not remodel it, but fix it up a bit. So they wanted higher resolution just in case to make sure that they were capturing the quality. Although 300 is great and can do that. We do lab notebook scanning, of course, microfilm scanning, and 300 DPI is the gold standard. Barely ever hear about 600. We see it asked for a lot, like in RFPs and original questions about projects, like, hey, can I get 600? We typically talk people away from that because it's just not worth the extra expense. You're not really going to tell, unless you're just some really intense researcher. It's just not going to matter, and it's going to cost a lot more. Let's see here. Indexing. It's digital file naming. So you scan the film, well, then you have to do something with the images and name them. In most cases, of course, you could just get a bunch of files back with just a unique ID number, but most people don't want that. Now, aside from the quantity, the number of roles, indexing is probably the second most important, well, at least top 3 cost factor, because you can go simple, like role level we're looking at here, the most inexpensive, cost-effective way, and then you can go to infinity and make it as complex and fancy as you want. But role level is the simplest, most cost-effective method because it replicates what you have now. You have the physical records, they're probably going to be in a box with a label on it. Scan the roles, you have your digital images, but you just name that entire file or that group of files by what's on that box label. You're replicating what you have now. It's a great place to start. For example, this is a box label of a role. Here's the tag on it. Here's the information. That would be role level indexing. We may not capture all that. You may not need some of this, but like this is the title of the newspaper and the years. Typically in something like this, we say, hey, we want role level indexing. We'd capture the title, Watsonville Register, Paharoni and Son, and then the issue dates that are on that roll. Done. You have your roll. It's inherently faster than physical film, but now it's digital and you're replicating how you already know how to find it. Then there's file level, more granular. It could be best for frequently accessed records, meaning you're getting into these a lot and you want to not to worry about finding them on a roll. Even though it's quicker than the physical film, you still think, I just want to go straight to it. So in this case, sticking with newspaper microfilm, file level would be the issue date. So we'd actually capture not just the title here, but we'd find the year, the month, the day, and then tag all that. And then we'd basically break that roll up into a multi-page file, let's say, that's named by the issue date. You might have a 10, 20-page file called Register Paharonian, January 1st, 2023. Boom, here's your 10-page file. That's file level indexing. Image level is kind of the most granular you can get. Here's an example of an official record where you may find something like you're indexing based on finding stamps and signatures. So you're not even going to a single page and saying, hey, this page starts a file. You're getting multiple records on a single page, 1, 2. That's more intense, as you can imagine, than either roll level or file level, because now you have to go on every single image and say, not only am I looking for a single image to say this is the start of a file based on this one page, I'm looking at multiple files within a page. So that can be more, the more granular you get, typically it's more expensive. So indexing can make your project much more expensive than if you just kept it roll level. All right, subs. What we mean that is subcontractors. So we love subcontractors. We have subcontractors. They help keep costs down, as you can imagine, because certain people are good at certain things, or better at certain things, or have better scalability at certain things. So our subcontractors, it's not like just a random person walking on and say, hey, you want to do this work for us? Scanning the microfilm, we do that ourselves. But pieces of these projects, we work with partners of ours, our subcontractors that are vetted. We go through a process to vet ours. We have a handful of them. We have BAs in place, so contractual agreements in place with them regarding security and just how these projects are going to work. And we do security audits every year. We constantly update them and ask for updated information, how they run their processes, how they're protecting data, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't just like a company off the street, or we find someone on Yelp, say, hey, we want them for a project. These are partners of ours we've worked with for years. some of them over a decade, maybe even multiple decades. And they're trusted partners of ours that we use for many aspects of our projects. Typically, they would be along the lines of image framing. So you scan a roll. We do have, programmatic methods of framing the images from the roll, but occasionally we need to have someone QA the framing, or if it's really poor quality images and the frames aren't easily capturable by programmatic methods, you have to have a human find those frames and actually say, this is the image, because it's either so dark or so bright, or there's no edges to these images. We have to have someone help with that. Can we do it? Of course. We like using our subs if we're able to. Indexing and data entry. Subcontractors are great with that. Document ID, doing some of the QA and QC for us. Depending on the project, we may or may not use subcontractors. And something about subs that's important is in most cases, if we're working on a project together and we give you a price, it is assuming we are allowed to use subs where we know we are allowed to for whatever type of project it is, or the specifics of your project and the different pieces of it. If you do not want us using a subcontractor, you can say so, but expect your price to go up from there, because again, we're assuming we can use subcontractors, and you can assume that we're going to be putting all the protocols in place to protect the data. But some clients just don't want us using subcontractors. Sure, can we do everything in-house? Absolutely. It's going to cost more. All right, schedule. Schedule is your project timeline, and it's based on either a start date or a completion date, or both. So you may say today is, what is today? March 8th. So you said, great, it's March 8th. I want to start, or let's say we're talking about a 1,000-roll project. Yeah, so what were we thinking? A couple months, we'll start the project, get the testing going, get contracting, all that. And you say, I need to start April 1st. Okay, that speeds things up a bit. We need to get moving faster. I got to check with our project team. Do we have the capacity? Do we have to move folks around? Do we have commitments we made that we can even get this to happen? Same thing with completion date. You may say, you can start whenever, but I need it done by April 30th. Again, short timeline. We need to adjust for that and make sure we can accommodate that. Shorter typically equates to higher cost, depending on, I'll get into it in number 7, but depending on our capacity and also the specifics of your project. And when we talk about projects, and if we come up with scope of work for you, we're going to give you you say 1,000 rolls on. I say, okay, we have our milestone 1 proof of concept process, and that's going to be 2 to 4 weeks. And once we're done with that, the project may take another 5 to 8 weeks. That's a three-ish month project, depending on when we get contracting all that done. But if that timeline is okay with you, great. If you say, no, I need this, as soon as we start, this thing needs to be done in 3 weeks, you can see how that may change the pricing. It doesn't have to change it, but it may, depending on number 7, capacity, which is our ability to accommodate your schedule. So based on your project factors of the schedule, the specs of the project, if it's a really simple project, may not be a big deal if you want a short timeline, starting or finishing quicker, or just doing it in a really short amount of time, and the complexity itself. And then based on our internal factors, such as our existing commitments, sometimes we just may not be able to do it for you because we have so many projects or so much microfilm in-house at that current moment that we just can't do it on that timeline, or they may be very difficult to. Can we flex other projects? Most clients are okay with extending a little bit, shortening a little bit, moving around, but some do have also their own commitments, their own timelines they're trying to reach. And can we allocate additional resources, meaning machines? We have the capacity based on hardware, machines, and scanning and processing, as well as the human aspect, the shifts. Even if we have all the machines in the world, do we have enough people to man those machines and actually get the work done? So that is what capacity ties into. We have OCR, or optical character recognition, which basically means text search. So you get your digital files, you can search them for words, phrases, characters, etc. This may or may not be included in a project depending on the scope. Certain types of microfilm aren't great for OCR, like engineering drawings, not very useful. If you're getting image level indexing or file level indexing, like let's say student record transcripts. Do you need OCR if you're going to the file, that one page where all the information is anyway? Maybe, maybe not. Depending on the project, the OCR may or may not be included. And yes, it's machine time. We don't have someone sitting there writing down the words and then applying them separately. It's not a human doing that. but it still requires project management oversight. Project manager has to deal with exceptions, like sometimes images are just so dense or so bad that they fail. That requires someone to go and check it, see what the issue is, reroute it, reprocess it, whatever needs to happen. So it's not just, hey, it's OCR, no one's actually touching it, it's just free. Not necessarily. There's still management and server. We have to buy servers to run these processes as well. So it's not exactly free, but it may or may not be included in the project depending on the specifics of your scope. And just as an example, let's say you have 1,000 rolls of 16mm film. That's 2.5 million images. And depending on the images or the rolls themselves, it can take days, weeks, multiple weeks to run the OCR, months to run OCR, depending on the quality, density, etc. So let's say you had newspaper images, newspapers from the 1800s, super large images, super dense text. That can take a lot of time to actually process. We were doing a project recently, I can't remember which one, but these were pretty standard rolls. But for whatever reason, the images, the OCR per roll, so just one roll of film was taking 12 to 15 hours to process through OCR. And going back to that machine time, yeah, it's just running in the background, but if we're trying to meet a timeline, we may have to buy more servers, more threads to run more OCR, and that's also preventing other projects from going OCR. If this is a large project, taking up that capacity. So it all ties together with the capacity and the resources to get the OCR done. And lastly, there's output, which means how you receive your project. So we consider the traditional method, you get PDFs or TIFFs, and you're getting delivered on like an FTP or USB, and we're just sending that to you. So here's your images, here are your PDF files, you scan your rolls. That's a traditional method. Or there's the digital reel method, which is our hosting application. There are nuances of, well, why would it cost more to get, or cost different to have a traditional project than digital reel? Depending on where you are, there may be taxes associated with receiving the physical hard drive, like compared to an electronic delivery. You may say you want an FTP, but the size of the files they're just massive, and it's going to take months for you to download it. That may be a problem for you, for us. So we maybe need the USB, or maybe you want digital reel, and we can just push right up to our hosted system, and then you're just hosting with us on the long term, but you don't have to deal with the cropped images, the traditional images, and receiving USBs or doing the FTP and all that goes around that. Or you may have your existing document management system. A lot of people do. So can we help load to that and get files ready for that? Yes, we can, but that can affect the price depending on the scope, the complexity of what you need to get into your existing system. So those are the 9 factors. It's kind of a quick down and dirty, but those are the 9 factors that we believe will affect or can affect your project price depending on the specifics of your project. So if you have any questions, I'm going to pop open the Q&A section and see if there are any that I have not answered. And we have a question regarding what are NARA recommendations for microfilm resolution? I don't have the answer to that at the moment. I'm sure a quick Google search could find that, but regarding any sort of entity or agency that's recommending certain specifications for scanning, it's going to depend on what type of agency you're part of, what type of industry you're part of. So if you're in the library sector, you may have specifics based on the newspaper digitization or the National Newspaper Digitization Project, NDNP specs, or you may be in a federal agency that says I have to follow so-and-so specs. You may be in whatever, basically whatever industry you're in, they may have their own specs, but across the board, we work with all levels of government, city, county, state, feds. We work with private organizations. We work with research agencies, and across the board, this 300 DPI is the gold standard. Could there be a different spec? Yes, but typically it's maybe if someone's getting a grant for something and that grant requires a certain spec, sure. But if you have a different spec that you need, just let us know. We can see if we can accommodate it. At the end of the day, we can pretty much do whatever you need. It just takes time and money. So if it's a complicated spec, can we do it? Sure. It may be something we have to create new processes for, implement a different workflow, and figure out how to do it for you. Can it be done? In almost all cases, yes. Okay, any other questions? Let's see, I don't see any. I'll give another 5-10 seconds while I take a sip of water. Okay, going once, going twice. I don't see any. So here's my contact information. If you're curious, you have questions about the presentation, the webinar, or you have a project and are interested in chatting with us and seeing if we're the right fit, got my email there. You can call me. You can actually chat with me on our web tool. You can get directly to me with that. And if you have your phone on you, hold it up and pull out your camera phone, hit those QR codes, and our website right here will pop up. That goes to our BMI homepage. From there, you can explore everything about BMI. This goes to our YouTube channel. Ton of great videos on there that describe different types of services and solutions we provide, not just microfilm, but other stuff as well. So check it out, the digital imaging channel. Lastly, this is my personal LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. Be happy to chat with you there as well. I'm active on there. So if you message me on LinkedIn and you like using it, great, but feel free to connect with me there as well. Last thing done. Okay, just one more check on questions, nothing new. And that's it. Thank you for attending. I hope you got some information to at least start thinking about your microfilm scanning project. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions. Even if we don't work with you, happy to give you some ideas for moving forward with your project. And again, I'll try to get this recording out, assuming it get a link to it. Appreciate you attending, and have a nice rest of your day.